Discover the advantage of unlimited access to all the stories and resources from IBJ and inside Indiana business. From insights to inspiration, business leaders rely on the IBJ for all things Indiana business. Start your $1 a week trial now at ibj.com/trial offer.
I could have the worst day ever, Angela, honestly, and I will run into a patient that just says thank you. Or I have an opportunity to make a difference for a patient that they never thought would happen for them. Not because we're doing anything outside of the norm, but because they just didn't know they even had the opportunity. So it's in those moments where you recognize this is why.
That was Dr. Nicole Harper, Vice President of Revenue Cycle Services and the Chief Financial Officer of Eskenazi Health, talking about her authentic and unique ascension to leadership in the healthcare finance industry. And this is IBJ's The Freedom Forum with Angela B. Freeman. Dr. Nicole Harper, welcome to the Women's History Month episode of IBJ's The Freedom Forum. Thank you for joining us. I am so excited to speak with you about your esteemed career in the financial and revenue sectors, even in healthcare. However, before we get started, will you please tell our listeners a bit about you, your educational and professional background, and any other factors that have led to you becoming the Vice President of Revenue Cycle Services and the Chief Financial Officer of Eskenazi Health?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Angela, first of all, for having me here. I'm so excited to be here. And yay for National Women's History Month. That's the best. One of the things we'll talk about later on, I think one of my superpowers is the fact that I get to be a woman. And so super excited to be here to celebrate that. So tell the listeners a little bit about myself. So I like to describe myself as a transformational leader with a little woo and a lot of passion. So woo, if you're a strength finders person, is one of the constructs, and I believe in it because I believe in the importance of celebrating all things. I believe in the importance of celebrating big wins, the losses, because I believe that you learn from the losses. I believe in celebrating it all because they're all a way forward. How I got here, my background. So I have my undergraduate degree in health administration from Indiana University, Bloomington. Whoop, whoop. Go IU. And just let that settle in for a second because it took us a lifetime to get here. We can talk about that in another podcast. And then moved into my business degree. I obtained my business degree in international business, master's in business administration from Anderson University, and then finished out at Walden University, securing my doctorate in leadership and organizational development, and then went on to do some executive work at Wharton University. I thought I always wanted to be a nurse because I loved healthcare, and I still love healthcare. It was just something about bodily fluid and death that sort of held me up from my original dream, but it actually is how I got here because I really wanted to make sure I got a chance to stay connected in that healthcare environment. And I was finishing up my last semester of my freshman year at IU in Bloomington and had an opportunity to do a rotation in the hospital and ran into a situation. And I thought, oh my goodness, I don't think this is what I can do every day, all day long. So I left the hospital. I called my mother. Snot bubble crying like, oh, this is over because this is all I've ever dreamed of. And she was like, girl, get it together, right? Like, take a deep breath. Let's figure out another way forward. So I reached out to my counselor who introduced me to the world of health administration and how I could use that to bridge the gap, really do the healthcare work on the other side. So not necessarily patient care, but my role is to support someone who is caring for a patient. And so it was a great opportunity to bridge the two. So finished my undergrad degree and got my first big girl job. And I remember sitting in the boardroom with all the boys, and I couldn't understand not one conversation that they were having. And I felt so uncomfortable and out of place. And in that moment, and I always knew, like, there was in the back of my head, I wanted to teach, I wanted to do all these great things. And, I had this really prescriptive plan. See how well those work. But I had this really prescriptive plan, and I was eventually going to get there. But it escalated as I recognized I couldn't be a part of the conversation. Not even necessarily to join into the discussion, but even to understand what was being discussed.
Yep.
It was very uncomfortable for me, and I decided right then and there it was definitely time to escalate my plan. So I went back and got my master's degree in business with a specialization in international business. And from there, I wanted to teach. And I felt like when I got to the point where I was done with corporate America, so to speak, I would get a chance to shape young minds in the collegiate setting because I really do love to teach. I love education. I love the opportunity to learn and grow. And so finished up my master's degree and went on to finish out my doctorate. I didn't have kids. I wasn't married. I was like, well, I don't have anything else to do, so let's just go ahead and knock this out. So it was great. So did all that. It was awesome. It was kind of interesting, though, because my my doctorate degree has nothing to do with healthcare. So I kind of like to describe my background as this Frankenstein approach to my dream, my ultimate dream. But interestingly enough, there were several people that suggested out loud that my doctorate was problematic in the healthcare field because, one, nobody really appreciates it because saying doctor in the hospital can become a bit of a concern if you're not a medical doctor.
Sure.
And so there were several people that encouraged me not to use my doctorate in the hospital setting because nobody would appreciate it. I can receive that. I also recognize that the learning and the training that I received in an attempt to complete my doctorate have absolutely helped to drive how I approach problem solving, how I connect in the hospital setting, in the healthcare setting. And so while it might not be while it might not be part of a normal path, is what I'll describe it as, it's absolutely applicable and directionally appropriate in terms of how we can embrace and encourage meaningful and lasting change. And so because I consider myself a change agent, a transformational change agent, it's all worked together. It wasn't usual or standard by any means, or by maybe a majority means, but for me, it's worked out perfectly.
Yeah, I so appreciate that, and it you gave a perfect segue and probably even answered a part of my next question because I so appreciate it. When you say CFO and you think finances and marketing, as a STEM person, I think STEM, right? I think science, technology, engineering, and math. And so when in looking at your background, I'm like, this is not your typical STEM heavy background. So I appreciate you explaining because one of the reasons I wanted to have you on and I wanted to talk about this is to exemplify it does not have to be that prescriptive path. It does not have to be a linearity to it. You can do a little bit of everything and somehow all those learnings still apply to however you choose to apply them. And I particularly appreciate because I was supposed to be the doctor too. And I always say it was the blood and guts that sent me to another path.
Absolutely.
Early in middle school, I realized, oh, no, this is not going to work for me. But even appreciating that, also acknowledging where you have passions and other ways that you can still be in healthcare and still support. For me, I am not in the trenches, but I am still tangentially associated with healthcare because of my life sciences background. And you also, and I particularly appreciate highlighting the healthcare and hospital administration piece because, of course, I do, it's a very narrow way of thinking, but I do appreciate how when people say and hear doctor, they just intentionally and inherently hear medical doctor, particularly in a healthcare setting. So talk to us. You told us a bit about how your organizational leadership, your MBA, how does that even more help you in your current role than maybe you had even anticipated or planned when you actually went for those degrees?
Absolutely. So I like to think of myself as a strategic CFO. So in that, I'm able to work with the team around me, and I have an incredible team. I'm able to work with the team around me to help strategize on how we're going to successfully and effectively budget for services, make decisions in terms of what we need to do for growth in the hospital, to support our patients, to make sure that we remain a pillar in the community. My background allows me to ask what I like to call outside questions.
Yeah.
My background allows me to think about things from a different perspective and challenge my team and push my team to be able to explain things to me in a way that helps to, one, identify if there are gaps in our processes or understanding. It helps us to prepare more effectively to actually have the conversations outside of our circle, and it gives us a chance to make sure that we're closing any gaps that exist that may prevent us from being or reaching a goal. And so one of the things I always like to talk about is the fact that one of my most proud accomplishments to date is making finance fun. Normally when people think about finance, it's like, oh, and especially in the healthcare environment, historically, there's been this feel where clinicians want to focus on the care, not the cost. And I support that wholeheartedly. And we still have to be able to appreciate the cost because it can get in front of the care. And so blending those two concepts has really been something that I've focused on in this role and even in my role from a revenue cycle perspective, because they're two very different sides of a similar coin. And so I say this all the time, our business is healthcare.
Right.
And if we don't respect the business part of it, there won't be these beautiful facilities or the opportunity for us to provide excellent healthcare. On the same token, if we don't pay attention to the importance of the healthcare part, who cares about the business? Because people won't want to come and seek services from our facility. So it's very much a collective effort, and it's going to take all of us. It's the quintessential, it takes a village. It does. And so while I don't expect my clinicians to know everything there is to know about the finances, I do want them to have an awareness of why we're making the decisions that we're making and be able to participate in a way that's meaningful for our patients and then ultimately becomes meaningful for the community, for the hospital. So when I think about bringing everybody together, that fun piece, there's something to be said about being able to explain finances in a way that people who don't do finances all the time can understand and, more importantly, repeat and then use to make decisions that are going to make a difference.
Again, this is so applicable because it's applicable on the legal side as well. There is a business to all this.
Absolutely.
And in your business is healthcare, it's patient care, it's saving lives, and my business is legal care and legal services. But ultimately, all businesses are in business to be financially successful.
Absolutely.
And so making it all make sense. What do they say? If it doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense, right? Making it all make sense and educating, in your case, your clinicians and your physicians and your nurses, et cetera. It's the same for us in the legal, educating us as to why certain decisions have to be made, the financial backing around why certain decisions have to be made. And that really is an education because as you ascend the ladder to whatever position, you have to keep those things in mind. It's not just, unfortunately, it's not just always about doing great work. It's that and making it all make sense as well.
Absolutely. One of the favorite parts of my job is my opportunity to actually advocate on the behalf of our patients.
Sure.
Because there's so many times where we get in situations where patients just don't know that they can ask questions, that they own their health information, that they have a way forward. The numbers that we deal with in most cases are big. They can be very overwhelming, and people will see a bill or people will see a situation and they'll immediately shut down because they just don't know how to take that first step forward. So whenever we get a chance to step in and really rally around a patient and support them through a scenario like that, not only does it help give them the confidence and the opportunity to just feel more secure about seeking their own care and being a part of their care, it also sets them up for success in the future because now they know they can tell other people in their community, they can actually get prepared for the next time they're going to have an experience in a healthcare scenario or in a healthcare setting, and they just get stronger and stronger. And in that, we build a better environment because there's a lot of challenge just in our community, especially as women. Just when you think about the disconnect between being able to ask a question around their healthcare and feel like they're getting the support that they need. There's so many studies and there's so much historical context that highlights this. Many times, women just won't ask. They'll take whatever they're told from their providers because you should be able to trust your provider.
Sure.
And so oftentimes I talk to women and they're just concerned because they feel like they're not heard, or they went to a doctor's appointment and shared some symptoms or shared some concerns, and they were made to feel like that couldn't possibly be, or they were way out of norm in terms of what happens, in these scenarios. And so they just shut down. And that inability to communicate and connect leads to more sickness, more illness, and then that lack of awareness, that lack of education then just continues to filter through the community because other people are watching and other people are taking cues from you, whether you see it out loud or not. Other people are watching how you behave and how you perform, and they're taking notes.
Yeah.
And then they build their process forward based off of what they see. And if we're not modeling what good looks like, then people won't see that they have a way forward. And so this is just so important.
Yeah.
So important.
I would like that you said that your background, and you meant, I think you were referring to your academic background being so different and giving you an opportunity to see things and ask different questions that were the outside questions, not your typical questions that you get asked in whatever particular scenario. And I would assert that not just your academic background and the differences that allowed you to bring, but also the fact that you are a woman and you are a woman of color and you are a person who understands what women may be facing in certain scenarios that may not be your standard question that you're going to ask just from and through your lived experiences, right? So as you were considering a career in healthcare and beginning to transition your initial thoughts of what that would look like to what it actually ended up becoming, did you have particular mentors or champions or people who made you aware or exposed you? Because I know for myself, I would have never gotten to my current role as a lawyer without people showing me. I didn't see that. I wasn't exposed to lawyers as a child. Certainly never made to think that could be a role or a position that I actually pursued. So how did that come to your being? How did that come to your consciousness? Was it through mentors or champions, or how did that come about?
It was absolutely through mentorship. And this is why I'm such a big proponent of mentorship. And the each one teach one, the whole idea that you actually have to have nobody successful on their own. This allyship thing is real. And so when I was first coming up in healthcare, I had a mentor, Margie Roberts, and she to this day is one of my most favorite people because she told me, I remember again being in a room thinking, ooh, I'm in over my head. I wasn't ready for this, or these conversations are a little spicy.
Right.
And I remember leaving a meeting. I was working for another healthcare system, and I remember leaving a meeting, and I said to her, wow, these conversations, I don't know if I'm ready for these conversations. And she stopped. We were on our way back to the office. I'll never forget. She stopped dead in her tracks, and she turned around. She said to me, you were always ready. She said, don't sell yourself short because you might not know a word or you might not have had this conversation before. You know how to solve a problem. You know how to listen. You know how to find the answer. You know how to connect. You are always ready. And okay.
Right.
I'm always ready then. So I took that energy, and she was just a ball of strength. She could solve a problem in 5 seconds. And how we actually got connected, she was a nurse that I worked with, and I was doing some work in revenue cycle. And we had some adjustment in our leadership structure, and she ended up being put over revenue cycle, medical record coding, billing. She didn't know a thing about any revenue cycle functions. And so when we first got together, she said to me, here's what I'll tell you. She said, I don't know anything about coding, revenue cycle, none of it. She's like, but I know how to manage. I know how to lead. So together, me and you were going to make this work.
Right.
And that was one of the first opportunities I had to realize that you don't necessarily have to be an expert in every area in order to be successful if you know how to listen, if you know how to seek to understand, and then work to problem solve based on collecting the information and then working with the people around you to put them together to solve.
Well, she's a great example of what we talk about so much in leadership, which is exactly what you said. Being a great leader is not you being the expert in everything. It is gathering the people around you. And in her case, she stepped into a role and had you as the expert and appreciated she has expertise I don't have, so let me lean on her.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's a beautiful way to build a relationship and a trusting relationship. There's nothing greater than your quote unquote supervisor. You're relying on you and letting you know, like, look, I'm relying on you for this. I need you to help educate me and bring me up to speed in that way. Yeah. So you talked about Miss Marjorie. I have to believe, and I say this because I am so used to being in, again, the STEM space where being a woman or being a person of color or whatever the thing, you are often so often still in 2026, the very first to do it, the very first person to have that title or that role. And I speculated and assumed that would be the case for you, but you actually let me know that's not the case. So then that has me even more excited. So in that respect, I'd like to know, who were people who, because we all stand on the shoulders of giants, right? Absolutely. We all have been elevated in some way by people that you may have the beauty and opportunity to know and others that you never know. So tell me some of the people who came before you who allowed you to be able to hopefully step into this space and this role with a little less challenges than maybe what they had to deal with before you came.
Oh, for certain. So yes, I am one of few at Eskenazi Health. Sharon Rogers actually was in the role of CFO prior to me coming along. And when you talk about standing on the shoulders of giants, she is the absolute ultimate example of that. And she pulled me into the office and said, "Hey, Nicole, I need to talk to you about something." And I said, "Okay," and I was working. So Sharon and I had worked closely together. When I first came to Eskenazi, I've been at Eskenazi now a little over 8 years. And when I first came, my role was in revenue cycle. And my focus was on improvements and really how to make sure that the money or for the services that we were providing, that we were getting paid appropriately for the services that we were providing. And there is a language barrier between revenue cycle and finance. And so when I came in, I was really amazed just to understand that, revenue cycle folks thought they were doing great things. And the finance folks were like, those revenue cycle people. And so when I just took a minute to understand why, it was just a difference of communication because we weren't talking the same language. So I really set forth about trying to connect that divide and just say, hey, this is what good looks like for us. Tell me what good looks like for you so that as we're doing the work, I want to make sure that it translates effectively. So let's find a few key process indicators or a few items that we can connect on so that we're measuring the same thing. And so we started the process of putting that together. Through that, there were just so many other opportunities for conversations, projects, decisions that needed to be made along the way, working with finance. And so Sharon had an opportunity to transition out of the role at Eskenazi, and she gave me a call and said, I have an idea. I need you to think through this. And we talked through the opportunity for me to step in interimly in her role as she transitioned out. And I remember thinking, oh, okay, that wasn't on the radar, right? So now, here's what I'll tell you. I do believe that success is equal parts preparation, because you have to be prepared. It's a little bit of timing and some luck. Because at the end of the day, when you don't have people that see your ability and can help put you in places that you might not have been exposed to, had it not been for that relationship, it doesn't matter how prepared you are, you may not have a chance to actually walk through that particular door. So Sharon was able to open that door for me. Now, I always say that when you get there, you have to be able to do the work. And it's great to have networks because you have to, that's how you're able to connect. That's how you're able to learn and be exposed to different things. And when someone gives you an opportunity, you have to be able to step up and actually do the work that they suggested that you could.
Right.
And so she believed in me and she made a way. And through multiple opportunities to grow and really settle myself into the role and go through all the normal processes in terms of the interviews and just the transition, then I was able to arrive at the position permanently.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now it's time for a break.
Get caught up on the state's top business news every business day with the Inside Indiana Business Radio On Demand podcast. Available now at InsideIndianaBusiness.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
We're back with Dr. Nicole Harper, Vice President of Revenue Cycle Services and the Chief Financial Officer of Eskenazi Health, on this Women's History Month episode of the Freedom Forum with Angela B. Freeman. So I want to know, in seeing her in that role, you considering that as an opportunity, how much difference did it make to you to be comfortable, not just based on your own skills and your own background and your own credentials by yourself, but also seeing her in that role, her tapping you and saying, hey, I think you can do this. Mm-hmm. You've got to decide if you think you can do it, but I think you can. Yeah. Because we talk so much about seeing representation in executive roles and executive leadership, and how that really does make a difference with respect to the people coming after who believe that they can. It's hard. It's not unimaginable. I'm the first. There are plenty first all day, every day. Yeah. But it's certainly a lot harder to imagine your success in whatever role or opportunity when you don't necessarily see anybody who may represent you, whatever that looks like to you, in that space. So was there a level of additional comfort? I can appreciate even some additional burden or weight because you have somebody tapping you and you're like, can I really do this and do it well such that I honor her in my ability to do it?
Absolutely. So seeing her in that role, it gives you hope.
Right.
And I think that you don't recognize it until you're in it, because I have people tell me all the time, like, and there are still people to this day when I say I'm the CFO, they'll turn, it's a visceral reaction, like, what? I'm the CFO. And for multiple reasons. One, there's not a lot of women in CFO roles. I mean, if you look at the Fortune 500 companies, I think there might be 17% of female representation in the Fortune 500 in healthcare. It might be a little higher. I think it ends up being about 18% in healthcare. But females in CFO or in financial positions, it's not the norm. You talk about the linear, you go to school, you're under normal circumstances, you're an accountant.
Right.
You're in a math major, you're an accountant. You leave accounting, you go into the control of financial analyst, controller, and then you graduate to the CFO role, VP of finance CFO role. Totally different from my scenario and Sharon's as well, for example. So Sharon's background was in IT. So all the more reason there was hope. They're like, oh, well, that's interesting. So, one of my first questions is, how did you do that?
Right.
And so you sit down and talk to her, and it's all about, you can still, the ability to do the work is, it's not necessarily the expertise that actually gets you to success. It's making sure that you understand where the expertise lies and you know who to ask the questions of and how to build teams and how to solve problems. There's more to it than just being an expert in a space. Because if I'm being honest, the things that we deal with from a financial perspective, I'm not an expert clinical person, but I certainly know some expert clinical people. Right. And it takes their knowledge and their input to be able to make decisions that are going to be meaningful for our patients, for the organization, for the community. And so in that, that was one of the first things we talked about. And so seeing her in a seeing her succeed from a non-traditional background in such a strong role gave you hope. And then to your point, yes, absolutely. When somebody asks you to step into a place and they've made a way for you, the last thing you want to do, at least for me, let me talk about me, the last thing I wanted to do was let anybody down. Yeah. And I do believe that I can do anything, right? And now it might not be pretty, it might be sideways, it might be clunky, but I will get there. And once I set my mind to it, even if I can't physically execute, I still know how to rally people together so that we can execute a goal. And so in that, the belief that she had in me and my desire to make sure I did not let her down, and then the work that we do, one of the things I love about my job at Eskenazi is the change that we get to make. And so pie in the sky, I am the quintessential glass half full silver lining person. I see the good in everything. I see things in technicolor. Like I really want to change the world. I want to make a difference. And so I feel like we get a chance to do that every day at Eskenazi in so many different ways. And so my passion in that space, coupled with her belief in this opportunity, have really made a way for me to work with an incredible team to make a difference every day. And you just can't ask for much better.
Yeah, so clearly you were placed in the right time. You had people that acknowledge your expertise, your leadership skills, etc. But at the end of the day, you clearly had to have the characteristics, the leadership traits that allow you to not just manage teams and supervise people and teams, but also in a setting where it cannot be any more pressure filled than health and hospital care, where you're truly dealing with the lives of people and patient care and outcomes and all those things. From what I could tell, in again, reviewing your background, you had about 3 either promotions or significant changes in responsibilities in a relatively short period of time, maybe 5, 6, 7 years, which is just incredible. And congratulations on all the success. But when I think about what I know that takes, it's clear to me that, you likely have some characteristics that everyone may not, or you simply have dynamic skill set. Like there's something that is particularly special about you that allows you to excel at such a high level and in such a visible level, right? With such a visible role. So I want to know about some of the things that have been challenging, some of the challenges you face, because you're at the hilltop. You've made it to the mountaintop. Like you're on a high end, but I know you don't get there without facing some unique challenges, some specific things that maybe only you or maybe you in the role you've had. Tell us about some challenges you've had to overcome, because sometimes I think, particularly as a woman or a person of color, being in such highly esteemed roles, people think you just kind of sailed there and you haven't overcome anything. And I think typically you make it there, but it's because you choose to make it there despite the challenges and the barriers. So in your career path, what has a challenge or a barrier that you had to overcome look like?
I'll go backwards. I'll kind of reverse engineer this. In this role, as the chief financial officer, plenty of people had concerns around the fact that my background wasn't traditionally a STEM, wasn't traditionally rooted in finance. And there were definitely some conversations and there were definitely some concerns around, this is an interesting next step. It is, and I'll be fine. And I will thrive in this space because, to your point, I have a baseline that I'm able to take and reference, I'm able to take and build from. So just because I didn't go, and I say this all the time, even with some of our physicians, not necessarily in Eskenazi, in previous scenarios, I've had conversations with physicians, because physicians can be very exciting to work with, right? And I'm sure this is true in any environment. I'm going to talk about what I know. There's been plenty of times where physicians have said to me, like, when did you get your MD? Or, how can you talk to me about fill in the blank? And my comment is generally the same. I've been in school just as long as you have. I just chose to study something different.
Right.
I'm not trying to minimize what you know. I need you not to minimize what I know, but together we can actually find a way forward. So I think really being able to call things out in the moment and address the concerns that people have has helped to navigate through some of the challenges. Now, I also will tell you that sometimes you just have to do the work. Sometimes you have to check the box because you don't want it to be part of the conversation or get in front of my people to understand and appreciate my ability to do the work. Because sometimes things like it's table stakes. You need me to have an MBA. You need me to have a degree in finance. You need me to have these things because otherwise, the first thing that you want to talk about is the fact that I'm not capable or that I'm not credentialed. Well, now I have all those things. So now let's get past that and talk through what are the other challenges or what are the other concerns that you have? And even more importantly, if you can help me understand what your measure of good is,
Right.
then that way I can make sure I execute in an effective way, because I think sometimes that happens too. People get focused on, I'm going to do these 3 things and it's going to make everybody know that I can do the work. Some people might not be tracking with those
Right.
3 things. So being able to have those conversations, I think, is really important. So that was one of the first things in this space, because I didn't have the traditional background. There were some concerns around I'll call them external concerns, where there was a reticence around whether or not I could do the work. I got it. Well, tell me what those things are.
Right.
Let's just tell me what you're thinking. Let's have a straight up conversation, and then I'll work through that, and I'll make sure that we check in. I'll make sure that you feel comfortable with where we're going. I'll make sure that we stay in connection that way. I think also being a woman in this space, because traditionally this is a male, and even in healthcare in general, it's a male-dominated industry at the C-suite level. So if you take a look at if you think about kind of the nurses, if you think about the ancillary workers in the hospital, 80% of those workers are female, right? 20%, and I'm just using big averages, 80%, 20% are men. It's the exact opposite when you get into the C-suite, because the majority of the C-suite are all men. And, it's the 80% men, 20% women. So then, you layer that into a non-traditional role like finance, it's just layers upon layers of, I wonder if she can do that, or, oh, you're the CFO, and so sometimes just engaging with people can be a challenge and just pushing through those stereotypes. But I think when it comes down to it, the work speaks for itself, right? And so one way or the other. So that's been a challenge. I think too, I'm a very empathetic leader. And so sometimes, and my woo is not everybody tolerates it very well. And so, and I've had to work through this in terms of really reading the room and understanding the importance of the audience. I'll never forget, I was going through an evaluation one year, and my leader at the time said, I want you to take read this response. And it was really a response that said, I don't feel comfortable working with Nicole because she's too happy all the time. I don't feel like she actually knows how to do the work, or that she's serious about solving problems and doing the work, because nobody is that happy all the time. And so what he said to me was very important, because he said, I want you to take this. You don't necessarily need to do anything with this. He said, but take it, tuck it away, and pay attention, because there are people that you have to work with that see your approach as problematic. Now, I'm not telling you to change who you are today. I am telling you to understand how that impacts your ability to be successful. And that was a really important lesson, because I've tried to really focus just improving my executive presence in that way, because I want to be authentically who I am, and I want to show up in an authentic way all the time. And sometimes that authenticity is uncomfortable to other people. And when those other people are the people I need to actually make decisions with, or I actually need to work together with to solve a problem, then I have to make sure I'm adjusting in a way that we can be successful. And so that is a challenge to me, because what do you mean I'm too happy? Right. I am. I am legitimately like this 98% of the time. And don't get me wrong, I do have my bad days. Absolutely. And I choose not to let that be what drives me. And so in that, there are people that just don't connect with that. And so I call it bubble wrap. I have to be able to recognize that, see that, and then make adjustments, because that might mean that I'm not the one delivering the message. That might mean I need somebody else who can connect with the audience differently so that we can solve the problem. So that's a challenge that I continue to see. And again, in the finance space, because there's this understanding that finance is very, very structured. And you can't laugh in the meetings, or you can't make jokes. And we can get work done and look, right? So that's very much of something that I work through every day.
Yeah. You mentioned some of your strengths, and I'm going to harken down on that a little more. You mentioned being empathetic. You mentioned being an empathetic leader. You mentioned that you are happy and you are bubbly, and that resonates with that positivity resonates with many people, but some people don't quite trust it, right? Like
Right.
nobody should be that happy all the time.
Right.
And I understand that. But I've had leaders and mentors, and oftentimes, particularly in a city like Indianapolis, where it's not as diverse as many other large cities, they struggle with the availability of opportunities. People often feel like they're a bit restricted. They can't quite move the way they want to move or they think they should move in a corporate setting. And particularly, we're talking about advancement, career advancement and elevation, et cetera. And I know that to be true. I know it to definitively be true, but I still believe that there are sometimes benefits or advantages that come with also being a person who's diverse or different or a woman in a setting that exactly what you're speaking about, that normally that's not the case. Normally it's not a woman in this role. And what do I think I can add or add value that typically that wouldn't be the case? So you've talked about some of these characteristics that you have, but I want you to tell us a few other things that you think are benefits or strengths that you bring to the table that you do believe have made you particularly successful in this role, that, maybe having a person who is not a woman or is not diverse or whatever the case, all the things, did not have your diverse academic background and all the different things that you bring. How does that culminate in value and benefit, not just for Eskenazi, but for the patients that they serve?
I think I like to call it my recipe, because I think that if you put everybody's resume end to end, everybody's going to have the same general background. Like if we're all applying for a position, and we're all similarly educated, similarly experienced, when you put the papers down and you look at the details, it's difficult to tell the difference until you get in front of the candidate and you start talking through, well, tell me more about yourself, So, it's that moment where I could get up and say, it's because I'm so passionate. It's because, I'm a hard worker, whatever. At some point, when you get to the moment where you're in front of the hiring person, that's everybody.
Right.
So what's so different about you? And I really feel like it's my recipe. It's how all of those things come together just so where when I walk into a room, I need people to know that we are going to make magic happen together, whatever that takes, right? As long as it's not illegal and ethical and moral and all those things. But at the end of the day, when I walk into the room, people need to know that we are going to make a change. And so it's the way that those characteristics come together. So I do focus on thriving in any setting. And I also have come to appreciate the power of no and recognizing that this might not be a place for me. So in my younger self thought that I could you put me in any environment, I could do it. But my time, my energy, my effort, my talent, my treasures might not be beneficial in this environment. And being able to recognize that and say no is just an important skill. It's an important tool in your tool belt, because you don't want to waste your time, your energy, and you want to make sure that you're in a position where you can actually create change, make an impact. So I think that's important. I think the way I feel in terms of the passion I have around the work that I do, so the feel around the outcomes that we're working towards, my ability to fight. I'm down for a good fight. Like, if I believe in, and I tell my team this all the time, if you believe in something and you have the documentation to back it up and you have everything, there's a reason why you're passionate about this topic, fight all day long. Don't give up, because when you give up, it gives people the opportunity to quiet your voice. And if you believe in something and if you are confident in why you believe in it, then by all means, stand up, stand for it, so that you can either, one, learn something new, because if you fail or if that's not the right answer, then it's a data point. You understand then, oh, well, I didn't understand that correctly, or you are able to help educate somebody else in terms of what you know and why it'll work. So I think that it's important to make sure that that fight is there. And then that moment where you fly, that moment where, I'd say this all the time, sometimes you just have to jump off your bridge and build your wings on the way down because you have an opportunity that maybe you're not completely prepared for, like you haven't crossed every single solitary T and dotted every I, but you have enough to make a step forward. And you take that step because sometimes you don't always have another chance to take that first step.
Right.
So I think that's important. And then I do believe in the importance of failure. And I think it's fabulous because I think that when you fail, you learn. So you find the lesson in it. And so I'm not afraid of failure because there's no way that we can be successful all the time with every encounter. And
Right.
in those losses is where we grow the most. And so I think that combination really has helped to just create this space and this opportunity for me to exist in a way that sets me apart from others.
Yeah. So let's talk about the practicality of all this, right? I mean, we've talked about your leadership style and your thoughts around leadership and leading your team and making an impact and your passion in the role. But let's talk about the practicality, the day-to-day, because I can tell you, I don't know what a chief financial officer does. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know what you get up after your coffee and do on a day-to-day basis. So tell our listeners what that looks like for you. And I'm sure it changes, but what does a normal day in your world look like? And what does a successful day in your world look like?
Well, let me tell you, there is never a dull moment around these parts. My days, I don't even know what a normal day looks like. Today, for example, I spent half the morning following up on a leak in my financial suite there. And then I left there and did 12 other meetings. I had HR situations that I had to deal with. I had financial conversations. So in my head, I have an agenda. I have the schedule for the day. And oftentimes I don't make it through that schedule linearly because it fill in the blank, right? My role, I feel, is to serve the teams that I support or that report to me. I function as a support to those leaders and make sure that I'm able to provide direction based off of goals, our strategic plan, and just big ticket. Here are the things that we need to be focused on. And they're super basic. At the end of the day, from a revenue or from a financial perspective, revenue minus expenses, right? Our goal, so before we even get to the patient care piece or kind of, so patient care absolutely is the first thing that we do. Behind that is revenue minus expenses. We have to outpace our expenses. It's super simple. So everything I do every day is to make sure, one, our patients experience excellent care and excellent experiences at our hospitals and our clinics. And I have to make sure that we are doing it in a way that we can keep the doors open, right? So we want to make sure that we're working together to reduce expenses where possible, to find new revenue streams. And so every day is all about seeking to understand current state and then taking that information and using it to help define, well, what do we need to do next in terms of expense reduction? What do we need to do next in terms of seeking out new revenue stream opportunities or improving revenue streams or service lines so that we can enhance revenue? So that's the gist of it. Now, underneath that comes a ton of all sorts of things because there's so many things that go into that.
Right.
When you think about expense reduction, well, is it renegotiating contracts? Is it driving different vendor partnerships? Is it reorganizing leadership structures? Like, how can we get it done? And we have to do it. So I liken it to, changing a flat tire while you're still running 80 miles an hour down the highway, right? Because we still have to show up for our patients every day. So how do we continue to do that and pay attention to the things that are going to create an opportunity to make sure that we can continue to do that? So day in the life of, I do have my schedule. I have opportunities to connect with the leaders in the organization. I have an opportunity to connect with my team and make sure that we're checking all the traps, so to speak, and monitoring our reporting so that we can see where there's opportunity for improvement. And that's a lot of the base work. And then from that, we can determine, well, what are other opportunities we can implement or we can explore that will help get us across that expense threshold. And so then that develops opportunities for us to think tank, to brainstorm, to research, to do all sorts of exploration around ways that we can serve the community in a more effective way. And then from there, that breeds connections, that breeds meetings, that breeds all sorts of researching. And so it just really it's any day, anything could happen on any given day.
Yeah, I'm sure. That's why I asked, because I can imagine it can literally be anything, any day.
Yeah.
And even like my life, what you had planned today gets blown up by something more pressing or more. Absolutely. I mean, that's just what it is. So when we talk about inclusivity in healthcare, that whole dynamic, that phrase, that understanding has shifted. It's shifted in our local dialogue, and it's also shifted just in general meeting, but particularly for healthcare, right? It's shifted over the course of time. I remember when, I've mentioned this before on the show, when I was at Lilly, and particularly on the clinical side of things, inclusivity was really talking about clinical trials and making sure that we were more inclusive in clinical trials, and making sure that trials were run on all kind of different people to see how medicines truly affected people differently and that kind of thing. So I want to ask you, particularly, I've had other people in the healthcare setting on this show, but not particularly from the vantage point of financial or even administrative. How has the meaning of diversity or inclusion in the healthcare space evolved over the last couple years? Over the last couple decades. And also, when you're talking about social determinants of health and disparity in health outcomes, what does that mean to you? I appreciate what it means from the clinical perspective or the medical perspective, but when you're talking about looking at the financials, how does that resonate with you from a financial perspective on how a healthcare hospital system is doing as related to their patient outcomes?
Yeah. So one of the things that we focus on is care for the vulnerable. It's care for all. It's a person's right to receive healthcare in a dignified way. And so that's one of the things that we are absolutely staunch about in terms of how we show up in this community. Everybody has the right to healthcare. So from a financial perspective, everyone should be allowed to receive the care that they need to exist and thrive in their community. And so that's our goal. That's our mission. So how do we make that happen? How do we make it happen? So the words, I think, over the decades have changed, and the expectation about how we use the words have changed, but the work has remained the same. So it's been challenging. It would be false for me to tell you that I wasn't impacted or wasn't frustrated by what we have been called to do and how we've been called to do it in this new environment. But what I know for certain is the work is at the core of all we do, regardless of what the words are. Now, I do feel like I don't want the words to get in the way of the work. Yeah. And that's the focus. But I also recognize that keeping the communication, the conversation going, because sometimes when people look at the face value of things and they make assumptions based on that face value. So when you remove the word, you say it differently. Sometimes people take that to mean that you're shifting or now you're not, you're showing up differently for us. And so I think it's important to make sure that we keep talking so that I can describe to you what we're still doing. And I can show you how this translates now just in this new environment, but can make you still comfortable about what you'll be able to access here. So I think when you stop talking, you stop learning. And so it's important that we keep talking and we keep helping each other learn. But then when you stop listening, I think that's when you can't hear the needs of the community. So being able to talk and have those open conversations, and then making ourselves open and available to hearing or listening and really hearing what the patients need, I think really, regardless of what has happened in terms of how that terminology or how the environment has shifted, gives us the chance to continue to show up in the community in a consistent way. And so I think that's one of the things that we've focused on. I think that inclusivity just means something so different today. And I think it's, to a certain degree, it's been weaponized, because, now it's been used, depending on the environment, it could be seen as negative or, depending on how you're using it or how it's being referred to could mean something different. And so really, I think the importance and what we've really looked at is how to just make sure that we stay consistent with the work. And we're going to still be here doing the work to make sure that everyone's community has access to the care that they need. And so it's shifted, it's changed, and everything's going to shift and change. I mean, like you can look back over, over history, everything has shifted and changed. Some things have come back, some things have shown back up again. Some things have changed, for indefinitely. And I feel like as long as we continue to focus on the work and the intent of why we're here, regardless of what the words say and kind of the feel in the air, we're still going to be what we need to be in the community for our patients.
Absolutely. I want to ask you one final question before we wrap up, and that's really about your own personal influence, your own authenticity. I think no question when the words shift and meaning shift and you're carrying all that along with all the real realities of what it takes to do your job and do it excellently. So how do you manage? I mean, I feel that weight sometimes. How do you manage that weight sometimes? The prescription for you to be exceptional at what you do, but still be authentic to who you are and authentic to the patients that you serve. There's got to be some days where there is a misalignment or collision in some ways. And so how do you navigate that in a way that has you going home day to day feeling comfortable and confident and remaining passionate about how you add value to, your organization and, again, the patients that they serve?
Yeah. So the cool thing about my opportunity to be successful in this space is my team allows me to still be authentically myself. And that authentic transparency and that ability to be able to show up every day as who I really am is so important. I think it's also important to find outlets. Because to your point, those things, those negative things, those missteps, sometimes they happen multiple times a day. And so if I'm being, honest, there are days that I just go and sit in the car, just take a deep breath and try and collect myself before I can even move, because all day long has been an uphill battle. And that's expected. That's to be expected in the healthcare. And I'm sure this is true in any environment, especially in the healthcare environment where, people are coming to you, they don't feel well.
Right.
So it's difficult to expect that they're going to be excited to come see you because they're not in a place that is representative of happiness necessarily all the time. So really, one is making sure that I keep my outlets available, because you do need to be able to scream sometimes. You need to be able to go in a corner, maybe by yourself, maybe with a few other folks, and just release. And then we still have to come back and do the work, right? Because I still need to make sure that I'm showing up in a way that is reflective of strength and a position of support for the teams, for the patients, because that's what's most important. So, but you still need to have moments where you're vulnerable, like you're real, I'm human, right? And so you have to respect those moments. I think because when you don't, trying to carry that and suppress that really translates into stress, illness, like you keep naming.
Right.
But at the end of the day, I think you need to be honest that this can be hard. And so what are you going to do with that? So every once in a while, you just need to scream out loud. I think, too, it's the purpose. It's staying true to my why, staying true to the reason why I'm here and the reason that we do the work. So there are moments where I could have the worst day ever, Angela, honestly, and I will run into a patient that just says, thank you. Or I have an opportunity to make a difference for a patient that they never thought would happen for them. Not because we're doing anything outside of the norm, but because they just didn't know they even had the opportunity. So it's in those moments where you recognize, this is why. And so those are fill my cup moments, right? Those are moments where I get it, I'm back in it, and I'm ready to fight another good fight, right? And then just really making sure to continue to try and listen, because sometimes I think that when it does get heavy and you just keep getting busy, or you're busy and you just keep trying to move through it, sometimes you lose, or sometimes I lose the opportunity to really listen and take a minute to hear what it is that we need, because sometimes it's not this great big grand gesture, it's something small. And then when I can find ways to create small wins Because I think along the way, too, we get so focused on the big goals that we don't take time to actually celebrate the small wins, and we can get depleted very quickly like that. And so what I've really focused on is making sure that when we have a chance to stop and celebrate, like, hey, you're killing it, right? Like, you're doing all the things, and here's the next goal or here's the next step. That has become something that has been really important, too, because we don't always get to celebrate this big thing, and it's sometimes a long path. And so being able to really remain authentic and be surrounded by a leadership team and my colleagues in a way they support who I am and appreciate who I am the way that I am, that speaks volumes. That's when I get to show up to work as my true self.
Right.
That makes a lot of difference because I don't have to go home and be somebody different or come to work and try and figure out how to fit. This is who I am authentically. And so then when I think about that and when I'm staying true to the reason why we do this work and really take a minute to reflect on the success that we've had and the changes that we've made, while maybe smaller than usual, there's still changes and we're still able to help make a difference. All of those things really play into being able to continue to show up every day and fight this fight and show up every day with a new, refreshed sense of purpose and opportunity to make a difference.
I just want to thank you. Thank you for representing. Thank you for doing the amazing work you are doing. It does make a difference. And I have learned so much in doing this work about what it takes for, a hospital system to run and actually deliver on the front lines to patients real care in a dignified manner, that truly advances lives, advances outcomes. And these are you and so many are the people. We always obviously think about the doctors and the nurses. We don't always think about the people in the finance and people in HR and people who help run the system, right?
Yeah.
And so I just want to thank you for stepping into the role, for doing it exceptionally, for showing up and letting people coming behind you know that, excellence looks like me too, right? Thank you for all you do for our community. And thank you for being on this Women's History Month episode of the Freedom Forum. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you again to Dr. Nicole Harper. And thanks to you for joining us on this 56th episode of IBJ's The Freedom Forum with Angela B. Freeman. Please come back next month for another conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the Central Indiana business community.
Curious about what's shaping law in Indiana? From court reforms and NIL rights to mental health courts and energy commissions, the Indiana Lawyer Podcast breaks down the biggest legal issues of our time. I'm your host, reporter Maura Johnson. Join me every other week for your insider guide to what matters in law and why it impacts you. Subscribe now in your favorite podcast app or at ibjpodcasts.com.
The IBJ Media Podcast Network is the soundtrack of a growing state. Indiana is on the move, and you can hear it happening on the IBJ Media Podcast Network. We bring you the voices at the center of our economy, our courts, our companies, and our communities. Subscribe now and be part of the conversation that's building Indiana's future. Find all of our shows by searching IBJ Media in your podcast app or visit ibjpodcasts.com.